I want to tell you about anarchism. But first, we must begin by saying what anarchism is not, since anarchism is one of the most misunderstood political philosophies. Alexander Berkman writes, "Even intelligent persons often have entirely wrong notions about it. Some people talk about anarchism without knowing a thing about it, and some lie about anarchism because they don't want you to know the truth about it. The majority of people don't know any better, but those who do know better also often lie about anarchism and speak of it as disorder and chaos." So, as Berkman writes, it is not bombs, disorder, or chaos. It is not robbery and murder. It is not a war of each against all. It is not a return to barbarism or to the wild state of man. Anarchism is the very opposite of all of that.
Because these are professional agitators, these are professional anarchists, these are people that hate our country.
In this series, I'll be summarizing Alexander Berkman's book, What is Anarchism? Also called The ABC of Anarchism, or What is Communist Anarchism? First, a little background. In 1870, Berkman was born in the Russian Empire. When he was 18, he immigrated to New York and became involved with anarchist groups. In 1892, 7 workers were killed during a strike at a steel plant in Homestead. In response, Berkman attempted to assassinate Henry Clay Frick, the manager of the plant, and spent 14 years in prison. In 1917, he was imprisoned yet again for opposing the draft and was then deported to Russia in 1918. Although at first optimistic, he soon became disillusioned with the Bolsheviks and moved to France in 1921. He wrote What is Anarchism in an attempt to revive the anarchist movement after repression in both the United States and the Soviet Union. I'll be giving a chapter-by-chapter summary to go along with the book. This video, part 1, focuses on the anarchist critique of capitalist society. Part 2 will focus on the Russian Revolution and the anarchist critique of so-called state socialism, and part 3 will focus on anarchist philosophy. Berkman says, "Anarchism means that you should be free, that no one should enslave you, boss you, rob you, or impose upon you. It's a society where all people are free, and all enjoy equally the benefits of an ordered and sensible life. Let us examine how our society is the opposite of this, how attempts at creating such a society have failed, and how we can actually achieve such a society. All of us, no matter who you are, want health, liberty, and well-being. So why is it that people lie, cheat, steal, and kill? Is it because health, liberty, and well-being are acquired by doing those things? Surely there must be another way. If we all want the same things in life, then our interests are the same, and we should help each other attain these things. But we do not, because in our current society, our interests are opposed to each other. When you go to the store, you want to save as much money as you can, but the storekeeper wants to make as much money as they can. Since we live under capitalism, a system of profit-making, our interests can never be the same. In every country, the workers are the poorest class. Despite doing more labor than the middle and upper classes, their wages alone will never make them rich. Without labor, there would be nothing but the bare earth, so it stands to reason that all the wealth of the world is the product of labor. Despite this, the wealth of the world does not belong to those who labor, the working class. Further, no one can make anything all by themselves. Berkman gives the example of a carpenter. The carpenter cannot make a simple chair or bench all by himself, not even if he should cut down a tree and prepare the lumber himself. He needs a saw and a hammer, nails and tools, which he cannot make by himself. And even if he should make these himself, he would first need the raw materials, steel and iron, which other people would have to supply. So, all wealth is the product of labor, and the labor is done by society as a whole. Since all wealth is social, it should belong to society as a whole. Why is it that the majority of the world's wealth is in the hands of a few people. It's because they have taken away the product of labor that laborers created. Not only is wealth being taken from the working class, they are being robbed, because surely no one has ever willingly consented to have their wealth taken away from them. Let's see how this robbery takes place. Chances are that you are in the working class. That is, you must sell your labor power to the capitalists to make a living. It's unlikely that you could simply work for yourself, since you cannot compete with big business, and also unlikely that you can simply start your own business because you lack the capital to do so. Instead, you must find an employer. You sell him your labor power, and he pays you wages. Although your labor produces value, your employer keeps the profit. Your wage is only a fraction of the value that you produced. This system, the capitalist system, goes largely unquestioned, even by the workers themselves. When people do question it, they are called communists and told to leave if they don't like it. We are taught that this system is natural and inevitable, just and eternal. So even the few workers who realize they are being treated unfairly do nothing more than beg the capitalist for better wages. It would be like if you were to catch a burglar stealing your things, and instead of stopping them, you politely ask them to not take everything, and then thanking them for giving a few things back. So why do people not question the system? Well, think back to your own experiences. You were probably told that this is just the way things are, and that you should be happy with what you have. That capitalism is not perfect, but there are no alternatives. If you just work hard enough, you will succeed. You were taught that it is wrong for the homeless person to steal bread to feed themselves, but not for the rich to steal a vastly greater sum from the workers. But, you ask, isn't theft forbidden by law? Yes, the law states that no one can take anything from you without your consent. So, it's legal for your employer to take the fruit of your labor because you consented to it. But did you really consent to this? Sure, you were able to choose your employer, and you agreed to work for a certain wage. But what about working for an employer itself? Again, you cannot start your own business without the capital to do so. From your meager wages alone, you are unlikely to attain such capital. And even if you did, you could not compete against big business. So, you must work for an employer or starve. You are compelled to work in order to live. Otherwise, you would not agree to be robbed by your employer. But at least I have my freedom, you say. Do you though? Your freedom is limited by your opportunities. Your opportunities are dependent on your wages. Your wages are dependent on your employer, who you are compelled to work for. You are not free. You are a wage slave. Not only are you being robbed, this robbery is protected and upheld by the government, which then proceeds to fool you into believing that you are free. The government, schools, and churches all deceive you, so it'll be easier to exploit you. Through your labor and through taxation, you support the very system which enslaves you. But you ask, doesn't my boss support me by giving me a job? He gives you permission to work for him, sure, but you support him as long as you work for him, because he profits off of your labor. Perhaps you agree. You know this system is rotten to the core, but you don't think you can do anything about it. I'm only one person, you might say. But you're not the only one. You are one of millions who are being exploited just as you are, only they don't know it yet. For if they did, they wouldn't stand for it. Berkman says, the whole of mankind is dependent upon and enslaved by just a handful of men who have monopolized almost the entire wealth of the world, but who have themselves never created anything. Maybe you think these billionaires have worked hard for their wealth. The truth of the matter is that many of them don't work at all, and the ones that do, they produce nothing. They work to get greater profits from their workers, to further enrich themselves. just as a thief takes great risks and works very hard to steal from you. Again, Berkman writes, "It seems ridiculous that the whole world should slave for the benefit of a handful of monopolists, and that all should have to depend upon them for their right and opportunity to live. It is more ridiculous when you consider that the workers and farmers who alone create the wealth should be the most dependent and the poorest of all the other classes in society." If the millions of people could see how they are being fooled, exploited, and enslaved, they would not stand for it, and the capitalists know this. This is why they need laws, police and soldiers, courts and prisons to protect capitalism. Here's how the system operates. 1. Capitalism robs and exploits the whole of the people. 2. The laws legalize and uphold this capitalist robbery. 3. The government uses one part of the people to aid and protect the capitalists in robbing the whole of the people. 4. The entire thing is kept up by educating the people to believe that capitalism is right, that the law is just, and that the government must be obeyed. One argument often made in favor of capitalism is our technological innovation and progress. Yes, this is true to some extent. We are now able to communicate with those across the world at an instant, fly across the continent in a matter of hours, and even escape our atmosphere. Yet, despite all of this progress, we cannot even take care of the most basic needs of our people. Millions live in misery without proper access to food and water, susceptible to disease and even death, not to mention wars which kill millions of others. Why all this misery and death in a world so bountiful? The church says it's God's will, but God would not want millions to go hungry while others have so much that they cannot possibly know what to do with it, nor would he allow millions to be killed for profits for some capitalist. Others will say that God is good, but it is people who are bad. But how can it be the people who are bad if God made us this way? If that were really so, God himself would be responsible for our wrongdoings. Instead, if it is the people who are bad, it must be because our environment has made us this way. As children, we are taught from day one that our jobs will define who we are. We are taught that money equals success, that those who do not seek to acquire it at every turn have something wrong with them. Everyone is caught in an unending race for possessions, money, and power, which tirelessly brings out the worst in us, making us sacrifice our kindness, compassion, and empathy for greed, envy, and hatred. Critics will say, this is an unavoidable fact of human nature, but even if you believe, as many do, that we are ultimately self-interested, why would we want to take part in a system which puts all of our interests against each other? If we chose to cooperate rather than compete, our collective wealth would skyrocket, and our interests being virtually the same, there would be no reason to take advantage of one another. It is the law and government which upholds the biggest crime of all, the capitalist system. It is the law that creates crime by compelling us to compete against each other, leaving some to struggle to survive, while others have unimaginable riches. Legal wrongdoing is a greater evil than illegal wrongdoing. Since it is always permitted, it will cause more misery. The speculator who corners the wheat market and makes $1 million profit by raising the price of bread is a far greater criminal than the homeless woman who steals a loaf of bread to feed her children. We hear lots about crime and criminals in the news, but never of the crimes of capitalism. We do not hear as often about the poverty, desperation, and suicide that follows the crises of each so-called business cycle. We do not hear about how capitalism itself causes unemployment, or how wars of conquest are the result of conflicting financial interests of the rich. Let's turn to these two claims. Under capitalism, there is what Marx called the reserve army of labor. This is permanent unemployment in every capitalist country. Even at the lowest rate of unemployment in US history, nearly 2 million people were out of work. This standing army of unemployment is necessary and inevitable under capitalism. You will find thousands or even millions in every single capitalist country who are willing and able to do work, but unable to find it. Under capitalism, productivity and efficiency benefit the employer, not the worker. Workers increase their output without an increase in wages. This is because hundreds are willing to take your job as soon as you quit, get fired, go on strike, become disabled, or die. The threat of unemployment forces workers to compete for underpaid jobs, compelling them to work for as little as possible. Berkman writes, "It is in the interest of the people that there should be no unemployed, that all should have an opportunity to work and earn their living, that all should help, each according to their ability and strength, to increase the wealth of the country, so that each should be able to have a greater share of it." But capitalism is interested in profits only, not people. Capitalists will employ as few workers for as long as possible for maximum profit, meaning there is greater unemployment under capitalism than a system interested in the well-being of all. Overproduction results in unemployment when the demand is less than the supply and production is reduced. This is not actually overproduction but underconsumption, because there are plenty who need products but cannot afford them. The warehouses stay full, but people cannot buy since they are out of work. Such crises are inevitable and cyclical under capitalism. To review: 1. People have to starve, not because there is not enough food, but because there is too much of it. They have to do without the things they need, because there is too much of those things on hand. 2. Because there is too much, manufacturers cut down, throwing thousands out of work. 3. Being out of work, and therefore not earning, those thousands lose their buying capacity. The grocer, the butcher, the tailor all suffer as a result. That means increased unemployment all around, and the crisis gets worse. We view war in a similar way to unemployment. It's terrible, but cannot be otherwise. You must defend your country when the time comes. But who and what are you defending in war? When manufacturers are unable to sell their products domestically, they seek a new market internationally, but the conditions are the same. The workers are so exploited and underpaid that they cannot buy the commodities they have produced themselves. So all the manufacturers are also looking for so-called underdeveloped markets to exploit. As they all compete in foreign markets, one country will compel an underdeveloped nation to give them preferential treatment. Then, their foreign competitors will call upon their governments to protect their profits. Then the various governments will call upon their people to defend their country. Of course, the workers are never told that they are being sent to die for the profits of the capitalists. They're told that it's because others hate their freedom and wish to destroy their country. They gain nothing from war. When the war is over, their standards of living are often reduced because they are taxed heavily and work to the bone to rebuild the infrastructure and pay back the national war debt. A handful of men make millions from the war as they loan countries money at a high interest rate to keep up with the cost of war. War is also a distraction for the workers from their everyday misery, and governments have historically avoided uprisings by starting wars. Even when people oppose the war, politicians and the capitalist press can use their powers of propaganda to manufacture consent. Objectors are called cowards, outside agitators, enemy spies, or anti-American. It doesn't have to be this way. You might say that it's always been this way. But has it? One thing has. Law and government have always been on the side of the masters. And the masters use the church and the school to fool the masses. In the era of slavery, churches and schools taught that it was the will of God, good and necessary, and that whoever was against it went against God. Occasionally, there were a few who questioned this system. They were called criminals, blasphemers, enemies of the people. They were tortured and killed, and the churches, schools, press, and government said that they deserved it. But although you can kill a revolutionary, you cannot kill revolutionary ideas. More and more people came to see the truth, and slavery was abolished. Feudalism arose and fell similarly, giving way to capitalism and wage slavery. The story is just the same. The church and the school tell you that it is good and necessary, that you must obey your masters. No matter how oppressive and unjust law and order, you must obey. Thinking for yourself is the greatest threat to this law and order. If you think for yourself against the systems of oppression that we live under, you should feel outraged. Is there no justice in the world? No. There cannot be justice when one person can rule over another. Berkman writes, "Authority corrupts its holder and debases its victims." When someone is vested with authority, they are more likely to act unjustly, and those under them suppress the urge to address these wrongdoings. Berkman agrees that we act primarily out of self-interest, but hierarchy pits our interests against one another. He describes justice as each gets their due, and we have seen how under capitalism, workers do not own the wealth they produce, so they can never get justice under capitalism. Under capitalism, we have class justice, that is, justice for the rich, injustice for the poor. When workers go on strike, the government comes to the rescue of the capitalist, sending in the police to arrest the strikers so the capitalists can fill their places. This is class warfare. The politicians, the capitalist press, churches, and schools constantly tell you that law means justice, that all are equal before the law, and that everyone enjoys liberty and has the same opportunity in life as the next fellow. These lies are the foundation of our government, which you pay to keep you a wage slave. As soon as you decide to rebel against the system, any attempt to improve your living conditions is crushed with brutal repression. But we have freedom of speech and protest, you might say. This is true, but the capitalist masters will do everything they can to stop you. For example, take the Haymarket affair. On May 1st, 1886, the movement for an 8-hour workday began. By May 4th, all unionized labor in Chicago was on strike, and a protest was held at Haymarket Square. All was peaceful until police attacked the protesters. Someone in the crowd threw a bomb, killing 7 and injuring 60. No one knows who threw the bomb to this very day, but 8 anarchists were convicted. Berkman writes that perjured evidence, bribed jurymen, and police revenge combined to bring about their doom. This is the kind of justice we can expect under the capitalist so-called law and order. Berkman concludes the following: "There is only class justice in the war of capital against labor. There can be no justice for labor under capitalism. Law and government, as well as other capitalist institutions, are always at the service of capital against labor, whatever the merits of any given case. Capital and government are twins with one common interest. Capital and government will use any and all means to keep the proletariat in subjection. They will terrorize the working class and ruthlessly murder its most intelligent and devoted members. It cannot be otherwise, because there is a life and death struggle between capital and labor. Let's see how workers may get justice. The church says to turn to God for justice. The reformers and politicians say to vote and pass new laws. Labor leaders say that unions are our only hope. The socialists say we need a workers' party, and the anarchists say we have to overthrow all masters. We will see who is right. Many put their faith in religion in hopes of eliminating poverty, oppression, evil, and injustice. Everyone is free to believe whatever they please, but let's look at whether religion can really abolish the evils we suffer from. Berkman points out that religions are thousands of years old, yet evil still remains. In fact, religion has caused plenty of evil. Bloody wars, people persecuted for their opinions and burned at the stake, scientists killed because they contradicted the religious doctrine. Even to this day, religions benefit from the regime of capitalism and are financially interested in upholding it. Religious institutions are among the wealthiest and most powerful organizations in the world today. Why would they seek to abolish what they benefit from? If we were to actually follow what is common to all religions, to never lie, cheat, steal, or kill, then we would have to live in an anarchist society. For as long as we have capitalism and the state, politicians will lie to you, many will cheat and steal to get ahead, and wars will be waged for profit. You are free to believe in any religion, but our hope for abolishing the grave evils we face must be placed elsewhere. What about reforms brought to us by politicians? This is especially important for those who believe we can vote our way out of this mess. The reformer wants to change society gradually, believing that throwing out the rotten system is too radical, too hasty. He wants a kinder, gentler capitalism. And whenever people misbehave, we can simply pass a new law, of course. He forgets that for hundreds, even for thousands of years, laws have been made to force people to be good, yet human nature remains about what it always was. For millennia, lawmakers have been writing new laws, yet we still need more laws, and stricter ones too. The politician is just like the reformer, only he is the one who wants to write the laws. Vote for me, he says, and I will be the one that makes things better. Once elected, he forgets his promises and furthers his own interests. The reformer and politician assert that laws prevent people from becoming criminals. If that is true, if the law really prevents crime, then the more laws the better. By the time we have passed enough laws, there will simply be no more crime. Of course you know this isn't true. All that the laws can do is punish the criminal, not get rid of the causes of the crime. Not even the fear of punishment prevents crime, for the law has punished millions throughout history, yet crime persists. We know that after centuries of imprisoning people, that they go back to the same or even worse conditions from before, and it is not long before they commit another crime. If we want to really abolish crime, why not seek to abolish the causes of crime? The majority of the prison population comes from the working class. Poverty and unemployment are the chief sources of crime. Most of the time, it is out of want or need for money. But the capitalists and the state aren't interested in abolishing these causes of crime because that would go against their interests. The police, judges, lawyers, prison guards, and contractors make their living off of punishing criminals. If they abolished the causes, there would be fewer criminals to punish, and less business for the prison industry. Berkman argues that if we look to the real purpose of law, it is to uphold the status quo, to make capitalism stronger, more efficient. It's the means by which capitalists legitimize the exploitation of labor. Democracy gives the illusion of freedom and choice. It gets the people to believe that they are their own rulers and that they themselves pass the laws of their country. Through capitalist institutions, the masses are indoctrinated with a false consciousness in which they imagine themselves to be their rulers, no matter how exploited or oppressed they actually are. They believe they are free while they spend a third of their lives as wage slaves and under the boot of the ruling class. Berkman writes, "The people of America are in bondage and don't know it. That is why there are no revolutions in America." Truth be told, the capitalists don't really care who you vote for, since the politicians are just their puppets after all. The problem is not that the people in the positions of power are corrupt, and that we need to replace them. The problem is that those positions of power exist in the first place. The law is an instrument of oppression. Every attempt at reform is therefore doomed to failure. What about trade unions? Yes, the union makes us strong. So strong, in fact, that workers had to fight for their right to organize, and bosses fear a strong union that fights for higher wages and better conditions. They will do everything in their power to stop labor organizing, and try to persuade workers that what is good for the employer is good for his employees. But this is just the opposite. The higher the wages the boss pays you, the less profits he makes from your labor. Unfortunately, many unions and their leaders are neither class conscious nor revolutionary. Most labor leaders are interested in upholding wage slavery, either because they haven't seen through the fraud, so they believe capitalism is just, or because they actually benefit from the continuation of capitalism since they're highly paid. Many are opposed to striking, and when strikes do happen, they meet with the boss to beg for minor concessions. Many bosses and politicians know very well that even when a strike succeeds in acquiring higher wages, this wage itself doesn't keep up with the increased cost of living, inflation, increasing productivity, nor even the wages you lost while striking. In the long run, your situation is exactly the same. You are still a wage slave, earning just enough to keep living and to keep working, more importantly, for your boss. If you happen to be in a union, a portion of your wages goes to the union, which should represent and serve you, yet the union has to ask for permission from the leader just to improve your working conditions. The problem is that we have bosses within our unions, just as the government is our master instead of our servant. The goal of every union should therefore be: increase the class consciousness of the workers, that is, how they are being robbed and exploited. Advocate for the abolition of wage slavery in the capitalist system. Improve the present conditions as much as immediately possible, and unite not only members of one business, but the entire working class. That means revolutionary syndicalist unions, not the liberal unions we have currently. This is formerly known as anarcho-syndicalism, a strategy debated by anarchists that I might address in a later video. In the next part of the series, I will discuss how the state socialist attempt at creating a stateless and classless society failed based on Berkman's experience in the Soviet Union. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more content like it.